Welcome to the Copeland Coaching Podcast, where it's all about turning your job search into a slam dunk. Your host is Angela Copeland.
Welcome to the Copeland Coaching Podcast. I'm your host, Angela Copeland. Live on the phone with me today, I have Jessica Rannow in Columbus, Ohio. Jessica is the Director of Professional Excellence for the Society of Women Engineers. SWE is a nonprofit organization with over 30,000 members worldwide. SWE's mission is to encourage women to achieve their full potential in careers as engineers and leaders, expand the image of the engineering profession as a positive force in improving the quality of life, and demonstrate the value of diversity. Jessica, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me on your podcast.
So, Jessica, we were just discussing earlier that we met earlier this year. I think we said it was in March. You were representing Society of Women Engineers at a booth at the NSBE conference in Nashville.
Yeah.
And you got a chance, I think, to talk to quite a few people probably. How many people would you say were at the fair?
I'm pretty sure they have attendance like 8,000 members
Wow.
at the conference. They have NSBE Junior, so it's elementary school kids up through professionals. I'm sure some retirees too.
Wow. It was a huge conference and tons of employers. I mean, it was just fantastic. Well, I'm sure you had a chance to talk to quite a few job seekers who came up to your booth. Do you have any tips that you might offer to our listeners today on how to really perfect their elevator pitch or things they might think about when they're in that kind of situation?
Yeah, it was interesting representing SWE at the NSBE conference because we were there as one of a partner organization. There's a group of the diversity organizations in the U.S., NSBE, SHIP, ACES, and SWE, that partner with each other. So we were there promoting our joint memberships and services that we offer our members. And so we had people coming up asking if we had positions open, which we don't. But I've recruited many times for previous companies I worked for, and I think the most important thing to do at a career fair is to go up and just state what you're interested in. Say I'm an industrial engineer, I have 10 years of experience, I'm looking for positions in supply chain. And then just asking the companies what they do, if you don't know, or what kind of things they're looking for. It gives you a chance to interact face-to-face with people instead of just finding the position, a job opening online on Monster or LinkedIn or something like that. And also, sometimes companies that are there will surprise you. I've worked for several retailers, and when we go to an engineering career fair, everyone's always surprised that a retailer would hire engineers. Why would JCPenney be at a career fair? Well, we had 50 engineers, and because the distribution centers are very advanced and require a lot of process work. So I think it's just a great opportunity to find out about new companies and different opportunities, and especially for students, a chance to talk to people in the profession and find out what they do day to day.
Oh, absolutely. And I think, it really has to do with, not being too scared and just realizing not every booth is going to sort of have what it is that you need, but you can keep moving. In these big fairs, there's hundreds of booths that you can stop at, so just really taking the time and kind of being prepared for it. I think, I spoke to a few people from Memphis who were a little overwhelmed because they'd never been to a fair that size before, and they weren't, I think, totally prepared for what it would be like.
Yeah, and it's also important to wear comfortable shoes. I've seen women walking around in crazy high heels, and 3 hours on a concrete floor, you're not going to keep making it through there. So I think that's one of my hints for career fairs, too, is be comfortable.
That's a really good tip. Because when you have those hundreds of booths and you end up spending half the day or so in one of those fairs, you don't want to be kind of like limping along at some point.
Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't look good.
It doesn't make a good impression. It doesn't make a good impression when you're carrying your shoes along with you.
Absolutely. Well, so you, we were just talking that you're the Director of Professional Excellence for SWE, and you mentioned that is a national role. You're the Director of Professional Excellence for the headquarters. Can you talk to me a little bit about what your role encompasses and how you're able to encourage professional excellence?
Sure. My role is I'm one of the directors on the board of directors. So we have our board of directors is set up with an officer structure with a president, president-elect, secretary, treasurer, and then 4 directors, along with the speaker of the Senate and a few other roles, a collegiate director. So my role is really focusing on our professional excellence activities and leading the committees that perform those exercises, including leadership coaching committees and our curriculum committee. So our goal is really to provide professional excellence to women wherever they're at, and then also for all levels of their career, from school through retirement. So if it's coming up with new ideas for different professional development activities we can have, new ways of delivering it, and just basically, being able to provide the tools for our members that they need to help them succeed. One of our strong, parts of our mission is helping people achieve the full potential in their careers. And so SWE's been, gotten a reputation as being a strong area for having professional development activities.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So we just want to continue that.
No, that's great. SWE is a really important organization. I was actually a member of SWE for a long time. My undergraduate degree is also is in engineering. But what kind of engineering did you study? How did you get involved in SWE?
I'm an industrial engineering major. I went to the University of Wisconsin, and I actually joined SWE before I even was on campus. They had sent me a letter saying that they were having a Big SIB, Little SIB program, so basically a mentorship program for incoming freshmen. And so I got that letter in the mail. This was a while ago, so it was letters back then. Mm-hmm. And signed right up and have been a member ever since. So, and I think that's one of the strongest attributes to SWE's is the network I've created through being a member. And that's how I got involved, with having this Big SIB that helped me go buy my books my freshman year before classes started, and helped me find my classrooms because I went to University of Wisconsin, so big campus. And then continuing throughout my career as I progressed through different leadership roles, from section president when I was in college up through when I moved to West Michigan. I helped start a section there, and then moving to Columbus is when I started getting involved on the regional level, served as a region governor, and then last year was elected to the board of directors.
Oh, that's so great. So do you find that a lot of the women who are active members in SWE that are later in their careers, are they still practicing engineers, or have some of them moved into new career fields?
It seems about half and half. Some of them have moved on to completely different careers, something in finance, or I even know people in HR. But a lot of, or they've moved up into management, so they're technically still in engineering, but they're managing engineers, or they're vice president. But then there are still plenty of people that are engineers, and that's what they started their career in, and that's what they love to do.
Mm-hmm. Well, so you are working a lot with, obviously, professional women who practice as engineers in general, and I think there's probably some challenges that are unique that these women face. From your perspective and sort of from your years of experience with SWE, what challenges do you find that women in engineering, what kinds of challenges are they facing?
Yeah, that's a hot topic, especially you see a lot of statistics about retention, that there is 18 to 20% of students graduating are engineers, but then retention when they're actually in the workforce is only about 10% of the workforce is female engineers. Mm-hmm. And, there's been studies done that after so long, only about 50% or 40% of engineers stay in the field as women. And, I think part of that is that there's a quote I've heard is that you don't typically meet an ordinary female engineer. Mm-hmm. Engineers, women that go into engineering typically are high achievers. There's been a lot of score studies done where women drop out of engineering with much higher GPAs than the men that drop out of engineering.
Oh, really?
Women will drop out with a 3.3 or a 3.2 thinking it's a horrible GPA, where A man will have a 2.5 and think, I'm doing great.
Wow, I didn't realize
and I think
that.
that's kind of, yeah, it's an interesting phenomenon. And I think that's because, with the smaller percentage, that's the women that are going into the area. And then I think that goes into when you get into your career that the women that have graduated with engineering degrees then have high expectations for their career advancement. And, if you're not getting the promotion in a year or two, like you're seeing friends and that majored in other things, kind of feel like you're not advancing as fast as you'd like to, so people move into those areas where they can move up faster.
Mm-hmm.
But, and there's also sometimes feeling the isolation if you're the only female in your group. I've worked for several positions in my current role as a project manager. This is the first time I've ever actually been the only female in an engineering group. Otherwise, I've actually worked in groups where I've been majority female.
Wow, you're very lucky.
Yeah. So, I think it's continuously being the only one sometimes can put you in an uncomfortable situation. There's also, depending on what kind of career path you choose, there can be a lot of travel and overtime hours expected. And as women start having families, I know that's the reason they'll choose different roles too, was just that the expectation that you're going to be on the road every week or every other week, or, even though you think it's going to be a 40-hour job, it ends up being a 60-hour-a-week job or something. Can change people's career choices. So, but I think in general, the challenges are, I think that's things that all people, if we can improve those things for all workers, that would help. It's not just women. If we improve, the working hours or expectations for women, that's also going to be helpful for men because they like work-life balance too.
Right, sure. Yeah, no, this is all really good feedback. It's interesting to hear that, there have been these kinds of studies. I actually can relate a lot to those studies based on my early career when I worked as an engineer. In engineering school, I was one of the only women in my major, and I ended up living with two guys as sort of housemates for my last 2 years in school because the alternative was just to live alone. There just weren't other women, and my first job, I actually worked in the automotive industry, and I remember, first of all, I was one of the only women, and there was another manager in the plant who went to my boss and said, "Who is this little girl, and what is she doing with my cars?" And, it was a real interesting experience. I really enjoyed the job, but being the person who was different, I would walk through the plant and to sort of, I guess, try to flirt with me, some of the assembly line workers would throw parts at me. And I don't think other people had that experience.
And I interned in automotive, and it was, It was. I wasn't so sure if it was more that I was young or that I was a female or a combination of the two, but...
Yeah, I loved it. It was one of my most fun jobs, but it was a really big deal that I wasn't a man. And, I left that industry in part because of that reason. So it's a really interesting, some points that you make, as you talk about the motivation and the challenges that women are facing. Well, I noticed in your own career, you mentioned just now that you started as an intern in the automotive industry, but, you've also worked as a project manager and an engineer, a consultant, a manager, and now you are a project manager. How have you been able to successfully kind of manage transitions into all of those different types of roles?
Yeah, definitely my career path has not led the course that I thought it was 15 years ago when I graduated. Some of the changes were by my choice, and some of them were the economy's choice. But I think one thing is that I've just been open to change and learning new experiences. Every company is completely different. Even if they're in the same industry, the culture, the people, the work environment, completely different. So just being open to change and, not just assuming that what you've done in your past is going to work isn't going to always work. when I've come in, especially because I'm an industrial engineer by degree, it's always the process improvement brain is there, and people always ask me, what can we change right away to be successful? And I found that it's important to just kind of sit back and observe and see what's going on, seek to understand why they are doing things the way they're doing before just saying, oh, that's completely wrong, you need to do it this way instead.
Mm-hmm.
But, I really just being open to new things, and it's been interesting, I've learned a lot of different industries and met a lot of different people, and that's created a great background for me. So I am basically going into a company now kind of as an internal consultant because I've worked in a lot of different places. And it's, the one thing, too, is that it's been just a great, having different positions, I've been able to, see what I like to do best. I've learned I don't really like working in a small company. I'd much rather work for a larger company, and that, those things are important too. So as I've made my transitions, I've learned what I like and what I don't like, so I can make better choices in them.
No, that's great. I think it's interesting. I've interviewed a couple of people who've been very successful in their careers like you have, and I've asked them sort of what has been the key. And ironically, every person has said being open. And I noticed that with my own clients. I do career coaching, and I work with people to help them find a job. And the people who find a new job fast or faster than the others are the ones who are open to trying something new, and they're the ones who are open to being flexible and considering a new field that maybe they hadn't considered before. They're the ones that seem to do the best over time. So it's really interesting that you mentioned that being open was a key for you. Well, you mentioned, you've gone through this entire path where you've made all these big changes. A lot of the clients that I work with are actually interested to make big career transitions as well. And that's actually one of the things that we really focus on. So I'm wondering if you might have advice for others in terms of how to make a big career transition like you've made over time, and what things they might do and what steps they may take, if they're really interested in doing that.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is to just try it. If you know yourself if you're ready for a new transition. If you're unhappy, I want to cry every time I have to go to work. It's time to make a change. So yourself if it's time for that change. If you're not being challenged anymore, or the culture isn't a good fit, things like that. And so I think just try it. Engineers in general are risk adverse, which leads to a lot of them, sticking into a position maybe longer than they should, or you're not wanting to make a change. And I think you're really missing out if you limit yourself to that. Both pay-wise, by my job changes, I've had a dramatic increase in salary over the last 5 years just by taking on different roles. And I've read something, I think I found it through LinkedIn, where if you're not making changes every 3 years, your salary is not keeping up with current salary projections or salary expectations for your position.
I totally agree. And I think people who stay in jobs for a long time are not aware of that. Sometimes they maybe are used to thinking 2 or 3% a year is just how it goes. But when you change jobs and you change companies altogether, you actually get to renegotiate from the very beginning.
Right. It's hard to do internally. I know there's articles about negotiating, asking for pay raises, but in large company structures, I think that's, for the most part, really rare if you're able to do that. Or you'd have to be in a high-level position where you'd have that ability. I think typically, if you stay in the same company, you're going to be, the 2-3% a year range.
Absolutely.
Something unusual.
And I think the thing that's interesting is, that was probably not the case for our parents' generation. I mean, they stayed at a company for a long time and they retired there. So I do see with clients who want to make these kind of changes every 3 or 4 years that sometimes their parents or their grandparents are pretty shocked. I've made changes like that. And I know with my own family there's a sense of like, what are you doing? Like, you have a stable job, stay there. What's going on? And I just think the entire work environment has really shifted.
Yeah, and I think, you read about millennials, which I'm kind of on the edge between the two, millennials and Gen X, and that staying in the same company forever is just not even possible for us. With layoffs, changes in company structures, it's just not, it's few and far between that people will have the opportunity to do that. And it's really, I think, a generational change that's going to happen quite quickly, is that people are just not, I've noticed, like you said, people that are older than me will be like, wow, I just can't even keep track of all the places you've worked. For others are like, wow, how do you find a new job every time you want a new job? So just a very different thing, the way our society is going, where that whole stability, traditional, stay in the same position forever is not what's going to even be feasible anymore.
Right. And I kind of feel like you're even moving in a more advanced direction, because it sounds like you're sort of serving as this internal consultant, which to me is where people are moving in terms of, over the course of your career, you gather a lot of information and experience and expertise. And at some point, you become sort of the person who advises other people with what you've learned over the years. I think that's a really interesting evolution that you've been able to make. What about...
accidentally, accidentally, but it's happened.
No, for sure. I do think, though, that, having an engineering degree for your undergrad, it can be very helpful, because even people will put a lot of faith in you, and, they assume a lot about your intelligence when they see that you have an engineering degree. So sometimes they'll let you, I think, try things that maybe other candidates might not have the opportunity to try, just because there's a lot of assumptions that I think you can do just about anything once you have that degree.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So, the other thing I wanted to ask you about is, one of the concerns a lot of my clients come to me with is they may say, gosh, I want to make a big career change, but I don't meet all of the requirements of this job that I found. I meet, say, 8 out of 10 of them, but I don't meet 2. And sometimes they, get some fear and they don't want to apply. I'm going to assume, given that you've moved between engineer to consultant to manager and then project manager, I'm going to assume that maybe you didn't meet every requirement of every job right in the beginning. Is that true?
Oh, definitely true. I read this somewhere too, where men will apply for a job if they meet 20% of the requirements, 30% of the requirements, where women will, if they're missing one, will not apply. I definitely have not met everything on the list. Usually those lists it's like 2 pages long of all the things they want for an ideal candidate. There's no way anyone would meet those requirements. And if they did, they'd probably be overqualified for the position. So,
right. No, absolutely. If you meet all the requirements, it's probably not the right job for you.
And what are you going to learn if you go there and you already know how to do everything on the list? My current position, one thing that they use Access a lot, and the last time I used Access was when I was an intern, and a few years. And but they're like, well, you keep learning other softwares and Excel, so we're not going to hold that against you. When you get here, we'll send you up to training class and you'll learn Access. So definitely, it's not something that you need to meet all the requirements. If it sounds interesting for you, it doesn't hurt to apply.
Yeah, like what's the worst that's going to happen?
Yeah. And for the most part, applications, especially now through LinkedIn or other ones online, it really doesn't take that much time to apply. And if you know someone there, it's always a good idea, too, to just contact them and see if they know anything about the position. My last actual 4 positions I've obtained through LinkedIn. 2 through previous. One was my college roommate, and one was someone I had worked with. And the other 2 were blindly the company finding me online.
Wow.
Contacts we had in common. Actually, one of them I had applied online on their website, Didn't hear anything for 3 months. Got a LinkedIn message saying, "Hey, we have an opening. Would you be interested?" I'm like, "Oh, yeah." They're like, "Well, can you fill out the application?" "Oh, I already did 3 months ago." Never
Wow.
found me in there.
That's so interesting. I bet the recruiter never even saw the one that you submitted through their system.
No, didn't. And they just found me when they were looking for retail industrial engineers in Columbus.
And they found you on LinkedIn, right? That's what you said?
Yeah.
I think that's really important. I get a lot of clients, and actually they're all ages, who come in and they say, "Is LinkedIn really that big of a deal? Do I really have to fill that thing out? Do people really use it?" And I say, yes. Yes, you do. And I think your story is a perfect example of why it's important, because you went through all the trouble of applying online. You never heard anything, and here it is. They turned around and they found you through LinkedIn.
And that was 4 years ago. I think they use, or 5, 6 years ago, they use recruiters use LinkedIn even more heavily now than what they did back then.
Yes, absolutely. Well, so you've interviewed for, I'm sure, a number of different types of positions, given that you've had, your career has been so diverse. How do you think an engineering interview might be different from an interview in another field?
Well, I haven't really interviewed much in other fields, but I think that engineers are typically, engineers are very practical and direct. The majority of my interviews have really just been about my background and what I've done, and the history. Not so much the behavioral theoretical questions. I find those more happen when you're at a big company that does every interview the same. So I would say, sometimes I've been asked to solve some problems. That was rather unique.
When you say solve some problems, do you mean like math problems?
One was math problems. Another one was they set up situations. Since I work in supply chain logistics, it was, if we were going to import this many CD cases, how would we do that, and where would we, here's a bunch of different options that you could do. What one would you pick and why?
So in that example, was there a right answer, or was it more to sort of understand how you think?
I think it was more to understand how you think. I'm sure that they had the interviewer, had a idea of what they wanted it to be. But it was more your thought process behind something.
Okay. And what other kinds of questions have you gotten besides the problem-solving kind?
Mainly just about, background. I'm a Six Sigma Green Belt, so on one of my interviews, they asked for examples of my work, so I took in my Green Belt project and was able to walk through my whole project. Examples were showed leadership and different projects that I've done. And then because I've changed jobs a lot of times, I typically do get the question of why you've changed jobs. So I've had, as long as I can explain my whole career progression, it hasn't been an issue. But that's, I think, something unique if you are changing positions several times, is why you've made those changes.
So who asks you that question? Like, what are they typically of a certain age group, or is there anything in common? Because I've noticed that some people ask that question, other people don't.
Well, I guess for me, it just always comes up as part of my career progression of why I've changed jobs too. But it's pretty much everyone. I know some companies are really looking to hire someone who's going to be there, for long term, so they're very concerned about it. Others, it's just so they will specifically ask about it. I wouldn't say it's a specific age range. It's more probably the company culture as one where people don't leave. But otherwise, it just kind of comes up as we go through my career.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I've noticed that for me, it's typically related to the company culture as well. If it's maybe a more old-fashioned industry, sometimes they've got employees who, they want to stay there forever and have their whole career there, and they want to understand why you haven't done that. And maybe they're concerned that you would leave their company quickly, and they were hoping to find someone that they could have for a long time too.
Yeah.
Right. So That's interesting. I think, with other engineering interviews that I have had, my background is computer engineering, so I've at times been asked to write computer code or do other things that are technical exercises, to kind of show my level of ability. And I think in one interview, it was actually kind of like a technical project manager. I had to actually take like an IQ test
Wow.
as part of it. Yeah, it was pretty intense interview process. I do find that engineering interviews are a little bit different than some of the other career fields. Definitely kind of intense. Well, I'm sure that you must work with, the women at SWE about, what to wear to an interview and furthermore, like what to wear to a career fair, for example. Can you talk to us a little bit about what you recommend wearing to an interview?
Sure. Well, typically I'd wear a suit. If I'm going into a manufacturing or distribution facility, I'd wear a pantsuit.
Mm-hmm.
Since there's always a chance you're going to go out on the floor.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of floors have grates and things like that if you go upstairs.
Mm-hmm.
A skirt suit is fine if I know it's just going to be an office situation. For going to a career fair, I would wear the same thing. You could also get away with a more dressy business casual outfit, black pants with a sweater or, a nicer dress, with comfortable shoes, the flats that are broken in.
Yeah.
I have had a few unique interviews, though. One company I interviewed with, they said business casual. They told me that specifically coming in. So I wore black pants and a cardigan, and I was still overdressed for everyone in the building.
Oh, you were overdressed?
Yeah, everyone was still in jeans. So I'm like, I guess I should have worn jeans. I actually did wear jeans to an interview because one retailer I interviewed with basically requires that you wear their clothes to the interview. It's kind of an unwritten rule. Living in Columbus, I know several people that work there that had told me, you have to wear clothes. And typically, all the other retailers I've worked with have not had that, but this one in particular is pretty stickler on that. So yeah, it felt really weird going into an interview in jeans on a t-shirt. But that's the culture. So it's really knowing, especially, I think if HR would tell you if you are supposed to wear something different, the occasion where I wore the jeans, I knew just because I knew people that worked there, but the recruiter I was working with also told me that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think typically, unless someone tells you elsewise, I'd stick with the traditional suit. Engineers are pretty traditional.
Right. I think that's what's really interesting. So what colors do you typically go with? Do you wear bright colors at all, or do you keep it pretty neutral?
I would say, what do I have? I have like brown, gray, and black, so pretty neutral.
Yeah.
For sweet things, I have some more jazzier blazers that are pink or green, but for the interview, I probably stick more muted.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, that's a great point. It's really interesting. I noticed, especially when I was in undergraduate school, the engineering school that I went to, RPI, was very particular about teaching us how to dress for an engineering interview because it was very specific. And what I've found as my career has developed is that other fields are not quite so specific and not quite as conservative. And like you mentioned, I think it's really smart that you're aware of different dress codes at different organizations, in particular the retailer that you mentioned where you wore jeans. That's such an interesting example. A few years ago, I'm trying to think, maybe close to 10 years ago now, I interviewed with a clothing company that's actually located in Santa Barbara, California. And I went in, with my suit, black suit, and I could tell that they were definitely a little put off because they make these very natural, organic, like brown, nice natural clothing. And I think that they probably felt like I really hadn't gotten the memo about what it is that they manufacture. So
Yeah.
I think it's really smart that that you've paid attention. But I do think in most cases a suit to an interview is very safe, and you don't want to venture out from that unless you have confirmation or you have some indication that there's something else that's appropriate.
Yeah, I think especially as it's interesting as the culture of the, high-tech industries have evolved, and I know that, jeans and flip-flops or hoodies or what everyone wears there, but, for the interview, I think it's so important to show that professional image, unless, as you said, you know elsewise that you shouldn't be stuck.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, so one of the things I really love about SWE is that you host a national career fair every year that's part of a big national conference that you put on. When is your next big conference?
It's coming up really quickly. It's our We14 is going to be starting October 22nd, so just a little over 2 weeks.
Oh, wow, that's so great. Well, I'll try to release this podcast right around that time.
Okay.
Where is it going to be held this year?
It's in Los Angeles, right downtown, and it's a Staples Center Convention Center.
Okay.
And we're also working with ICWIS this year, and they are an international engineering group. They hold their conference only every 3 years. So it's cool that we're going to be able to be together. So it's going to be, the SWE is an international organization, and we have around 1,000 international members.
Wow.
But this year there's going to be a heavy influx of international attendees as our combination conference at the ICWIS.
Oh, that's excellent. So a couple of questions. One is SWE only open to women?
Definitely not.
Okay.
You're open to men and women.
Okay, great. And what about the career fair? Is it open to men and women as well?
Yes, definitely. It is open to both. SWE is, that's why I think our title is, obviously Society of Women Engineers, makes it seem that it's only open to women. But men are important as diversity partners. If we were just women out there working on our own, that's not going to help us to be accepted in the engineering world. We can have our super strong network on our own, but we need everyone as a partnership. And so we need to engage men, and that's what's going to create the transformative change where women are going to feel more comfortable in the field and create that lasting change where they're important.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, we actually have a panel every year I think it's called Men as Diversity Partners, and it's one of the most popular attended events. And SWE, back to our founding days, Ronnie D. Chip was one of our first president's husbands, and there's an award named after him that's handed out every year to men that help their companies achieve in their development of diversity. And the award in his honor, he was a beloved man in the society. So men have been part of SWE since the beginning founders.
Oh, that's great. So also, is the conference and the career fair, is it only open to engineers?
No, it is open to anyone who'd want to attend. There's a lot of professional development activities that happen at SWE if you'd like, people want to attend the conference in general. Along with, they do offer career fair only registration because I don't know the exact number of companies we're going to have, but I'm sure it's over 300 companies at the career fair.
No, these fairs are so impressive. I think for anybody who's never been to a national career fair, they should go, especially if they're going to be in the Los Angeles area around that time. It's incredible. And I went to graduate school in Los Angeles, and I believe the year that I was there, the SWE fair was either there or it might have been in San Diego. But I tried to convince my classmates to come with me, and I was in business school, and no one would come because they weren't engineers. But in my view, those are the same companies that are at every other fair. They're companies like FedEx and Google and huge companies. And it's often the HR folks that come out and are at the booths. And, even though you're not an engineer, those people may very well be hiring for more than just engineering positions.
Yeah, typically you're getting the leads in HR at these career fairs because they're so, as you said, they are so huge, and that there's going to be hiring for all different areas. If it's a STEM field or a business field, definitely there's going to be opportunities.
Right. And I think, the other things to keep in mind at fairs for people who haven't been before, one is, and I don't know if you do this, but I'm guessing you might, at really large national career fairs, there's oftentimes an opportunity to have an on-site interview. So you go up and you pitch, say Microsoft, and you get along really well with the recruiter. Sometimes they actually have a schedule where they can put you down and you can go off into a private room or go sit, somewhere else in the conference and have a real first round interview with them right there on the spot. I don't know if you've ever seen that.
Yes, NSBE, where we met at, I know they do that, and SWE does also. SWE has an online career center where you can upload your resume, and partner companies and companies that are exhibiting at the career fair can go into there. I know they'll actually go through there and pick out people and ask them if they're coming to conference and set up for interviews with them already before to have occur at conference, but they'll set them up ahead of time. And then also, especially the first night of the career fair, people will be setting up their interview booth for Friday. And I've known people that have left conference with 2 or 3 offers, especially for new grads or internships, which is pretty cool to go to a conference and have your summer set or your, options for after you graduate.
I know. It's incredible. I mean, I've never probably, I used to go to these national fairs all the time when I was younger, and I probably never built up my network at a faster rate than I did going to the fairs. But I think you really have to be prepared when you get there. You need to bring your resumes, bring your business cards, and be prepared to give your elevator pitch, but be prepared to give it many times because there are
many people.
Yes, and to not get discouraged because not everyone's going to be excited to hear your pitch. So, if it doesn't click with one company, you just walk right to the next booth or a couple booths down and try it again. But I think really making a successful fair, it has a lot to do with planning. I think it also has a lot to do with what you wear. You mentioned wearing comfortable shoes. But I think the other thing, especially at a fair like SWE, is to wear a business suit or to wear something similar. When we were at the NSBE fair, which is also an engineering fair in Nashville, I actually have a friend who'd never been to a fair that size, and he wore jeans and, just a white shirt thinking it would just be kind of casual. And although it wasn't really a big deal that that's what he wore, when he walked into that fair with those thousands of other people, he felt very uncomfortable, I know, because he looked different than everyone else.
Yeah, I could see that, and if you're not prepared to just go right into an interview,
right,
that could limit you too.
Absolutely. And I think the other thing that's great, and I'm sure SWE has this, is typically you can download the list of companies in advance and sometimes even the map of where the companies will be. So you can even, sketch out sort of what your game plan is before you even get to that career fair.
Right. They do offer that. And it typically has a list of what majors they're hiring. I don't think it's necessarily limited to that. But at least that will give you an idea of their focus areas of what ones you'd want to go to.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, it's very exciting. Are you going to be at the fair on October 22nd?
I'll be at conference. I'm not working a booth,
okay.
But I'll definitely be at conference an entire week. So.
Oh, that's exciting. Well, is there any other advice that you'd like to share with our listeners today?
I think we just kind of we're hitting on that. Your network is important. The quote I've heard is your network is your net worth. So having that network is really important. And one thing also is to network with people not like you, to find people that are different than you. Because if you just, if you're an industrial engineer and you only hang out with other industrial engineers, that's not going to let you know what else is out there. And I found using organizations is a great way to meet people. Obviously, I'm involved in Sidewim Engineers. I've been involved in other organizations. My sorority alumni group. I'm in junior league. Throughout my career, I was in a symphony orchestra when I lived in Michigan. And just the opportunities I've had in those organizations have created a wide network for me and opportunities to learn new and different things.
That's great.
And the opportunities in those organizations have been great, too, for my career, with SWE, I've been managing people through SWE for years. So when I transitioned into a manager at work, it was a very smooth transition. I already had been leading people for years, so and have had to give difficult feedback to people, which is, I think, the hardest thing as a manager. At least for me, it was to give non-positive feedback. So it gave me a chance to, I don't know if you'd say, practice those skills, along with creating a larger network.
No, I think that's great advice. I really like that you said your network is your net worth. And then the other point I really liked is, you're a volunteer for SWE. I mean, that the position that you have my understanding is it's a
yes,
you're
volunteer.
You're donating your time. And so the thing that's great about you got the chance to sort of cut your teeth into management through that route is there's a lot less pressure when you're a volunteer than when you're at work, I think. And so you're kind of getting this experience in a way that's a little more relaxed, and then when it really does count, you're ready, and you've got this sort of training there.
Mm-hmm.
So that's great. So, for those folks who are interested to learn more about SWE or, who want to go to the conference in Los Angeles, what's the best way for them to find out more detail?
I'd go to SWE's website, which is www.swe.org, and that's SWE.org.
Great. And is there sort of a page on the website that specifically talks about your national fair that you have coming up?
Definitely. It's one of the, there's a few different pictures that flash through on the front page, and it's there. There's also a big button that's for conferences.
Oh, good.
We also have regional ones that'll be coming up in the spring. So there's information on that conferences link for those. Smaller career fairs, around 20 to 30 companies, but also great opportunities for professional development.
Oh, that's excellent. Well, I'm a big fan of SWE, and I really appreciate you taking the time today, Jessica, for, to join me on the program. The discussion's been incredibly helpful. Thank you also to everyone for listening. Tune in next week for another edition of the Copeland Coaching Podcast. If you've enjoyed the program today, please be sure to subscribe on iTunes so you never miss an episode, and consider leaving a positive review in the iTunes store.
Thank you for listening to the Copeland Coaching Podcast today with your host, Angela Copeland. Tune in next time to get more great tips on turning your job search into a slam dunk.